This isn't for your eyes.
Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm Max.
And this is Movie Nostalgia, where we give you an honest review of the movies we've meddled with so mischievously over at Maybe Movies. And this time, we're talking about Hellraiser. Yes, the 1986 film written and directed by Clive Barker, featuring the talents of Andrew Robinson, Claire Higgins, Ashley Lawrence, and of course, Doug Bradley as Pinhead.
Yes. Oddly enough, after last time saying about Edward G. Robinson, that being his last movie, this was his first movie.
Yes.
As he was he was a friend of Barker's from his theatre days.
Yes, the dog company.
Yes, that's it.
Right.
Yes, yeah. On the featurette, it's really fantastic. There's a bit with him and he's saying, Doug Bradley is saying that he was given a choice. He was offered the part of this lead Cenobite, as he's credited in the film, or he was given the option of one of the removal men.
Well, aren't we glad he made the choice he did?
Well, it was interesting because he's saying that, at the time, he's going to be his first screen appearance, and it's like, well, do I want people to know me for me? To see my face, not caked in latex.
Oh, right, yeah.
But then, on reflection, was like, well, actually, if this is going to be my first performance, I want it to be memorable.
Yes.
So, and it was.
Yeah, that certainly was. And we all reap the benefits of it since.
Absolutely, and I'm sure he did as well. I must admit, honestly, I can't tell you. I don't know when I first saw this.
Oh, well, it's pretty simple for me. It's one of those ones that's a good, strong memory for me. So it was 1987. I saw it when it came out on video, a month or two after it came out. This was at a period in time when we were getting movies regularly. And my mum was always very happy for me to watch horror movies, but they'd reached a decision that they needed to vet me first. So they would let me hire movies from the video store, but then they would watch it first and then tell me whether or not I was allowed to watch it. And this was the first film they ever banned me from watching.
So you'd have been, 14 at the time?
14, yes.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, this was also when my cousin Kim, who's almost exactly the same age as me, came over for a sleepover. So we were sleeping over in the living room because there wasn't enough room in my bedroom. And so at about midnight, we were a little bit bored after having lots of conversation and stuff. And my cousin was like, shall we watch a movie? I said, I'm not allowed. And she said, so? And I went, you've got a point. So I watched it. This was what got me into Clive Barker. I'd actually seen Clive's books in the bookstore a few times over the years and kind of been curious, but watching that film was what made me go, no, this guy's worth my time. And I went out and read the Books of Blood, and it's been a love affair ever since.
I'm trying to I'm now trying to rack my brains. I should have done it beforehand. See, I'm not sure. Did I see this first, or did I see Nightbreed first?
Nightbreed was 89. 1990 it came out over here in video.
I honestly can't remember. That's a part of my history that's a bit hazy, I'm afraid to say, for one reason or another. But yeah, I'm not sure. I really don't remember. I remember when I remember loving it, and again, similar to you, having loved it ever since. But I can't remember the circumstances of when I first saw Hellraiser.
It's interesting that you loved it that much, and you've had that love affair with it, like I do. But the memory doesn't stand out for you. That's,
as I said at the time, there were other factors that may have had an effect on my short-term memory.
Oh, I see. Okay, fair enough.
Let's put it that way.
Okay, yeah, that's understandable.
Because again, it wasn't until a lot later that I got to read any of this, unfortunately, and I haven't read the Hellbound Heart.
It was hard to find. It was hard to find at one point because it was originally published in the first edition of the Books of Blood, but later editions removed it, and it wasn't until like 1989 or 1990 that it was even published as a separate book.
Okay.
It took me a while to find it. I don't think I read it myself until 93, 94.
Wow.
Because it took me that long to find a copy.
If you haven't seen this, just very, very quickly, this is Clive Barker's seminal work as a director. And it was an idea. Apparently he'd wanted to try his hand at directing film after having, as you said, from being running the dog company, which is his theatre company, and him and a friend of his, is it Simon Figg, who's the producer? Both,
I think so.
Simon or Stuart Figg, I think it's Simon Figg. Both no experience at all working with film, but they just went, let's give it a go. And they had a friend of a friend who was happy to put up the money for it, and they took the idea over the pond and were picked up straight away by New World Pictures or New World Cinema.
Who were riding high at the time.
Yes, and they had an initial budget of 900,000, and they liked most of what they saw and gave them some extra money.
I was going to say, I thought the budget was like 1.3.
Yeah, so the extra budget was the return to the world scene, shall we say.
Oh, right, okay.
That's where where the extra budget went. Unfortunately, like a lot of things, the studio had to have their say, so they decided, like 2/3 of the way through shooting, that they weren't happy with this being set in the UK and they wanted it set in Midwest America. If you look carefully, you can tell that this has all been shot in England, but there are parts and characters where they've redubbed the voices.
Yeah, absolutely. 90%, well, 85% of the movie is clearly British. Set in British scenarios and situations. The environment looks British, but there are more American voices in the film than there are British ones. Stands out like a sore thumb. It's one of those things that always puzzled me when I was a kid. I didn't know about all the behind-the-scenes stuff at the time.
No, of course
I
not.
did notice why are there so many Americans in Liverpool?
Especially when you look at these people and they look English.
Yes.
They look so quintessentially English.
It was British fashions, the haircut, the perm,
yeah.
Everything was very British, you know. And then, like we were talking about the house, it's a very British build with the stained glass in the doorway.
Exactly, yeah.
Very British of a certain time period. And yet there are these clearly shoehorned American elements to it.
Which, even though, when you look into the background of it, that's, it's a shame that they did that, but at the same time, it does add that kind of slightly discombobulating, almost like no man's land.
I was going to sort of say slightly otherworldly. You're not sure where you are.
Exactly. It's the same way.
Almost like a fever dream.
Yes. There's, a kind of a more modern day equivalent of that, or example of that, would be something like It Follows.
Yes.
Where you've got
uncertainty of time and place.
Exactly, yeah. Everything feels 70s, but then somebody pulls out a mobile phone.
Yes.
But it doesn't look like a mobile phone, but it clearly is.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a real mobile phone, but it clearly is a mobile phone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Again, at the time, it does actually add to that sense of, as I say, otherworldliness to the film. It's a wonderful example of serendipity.
Absolutely.
That's
because, as you can tell from the previous story, that's all pure circumstances due to the production and the interference that went on.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that makes it a part of the artifact that it has become.
There's a few things that got taken out. There's a lovely quote again in the featurette from Clive Barker just saying it was hilarious. The love scene between Frank and Julia was a lot more intense.
I imagine it would have been, yeah.
And it was like, he said, it was like the studio said they only allowed Frank 2 pelvic thrusts because 3 would have been obscene.
Oh, I see. Right, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
But yes, I think it's my turn. So if you've never seen Hellraiser, this is the story of the Cotton family. Predominantly, it surrounds Kirsty Cotton and her father Larry and her stepmother Julia, who have moved back apparently to England to start a new life. And once they get there, they discover that Larry's somewhat misanthropic brother Frank may have been squatting in the old family homestead. But what's actually happened to Frank is a lot worse than they could have ever possibly imagined. And they end up going on a journey that most of us would be pleased that we don't have to go on.
Indeed, yes. I think that's a good way of putting it without giving anything away.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It is fabulous, fabulously realised by the mind of the man who created it. Just to very briefly come back to the featurette, which is lovely, there's a couple of bits where they're playing bits from the film, remove the audio, and they've just got Doug Bradley reading the extract from that scene from The Hellbound Heart.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which is really nice. And there's a nice little bit with Frank opening the box and all of that and how that was originally written and stuff.
Oh, yes, it's quite... That's the one scene that probably had the biggest change from the book to the film. It's much more explicit and much more extended. And the female Cenobite plays a much larger role.
Oh, okay. But it is wonderful. Again, if you can't tell, we like it.
Oh, absolutely. This is a classic that sets standards for all sorts of things. Urban fantasy, urban magic, amazing special effects, incredibly realistic special effects for the time. Not just imaginative, but horrifically real for the time. They definitely pushed boundaries in many areas when they made this film.
And there are some really nice sort of dream symbolism in there as well. That again just elevated that a little bit more. I think about things like the Carnation opening, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the surrealistic elements of it, and of course it's become a cultural touchstone, so much so that so many films have in some way either stolen from or emulated this story. The demonic protagonist, leather bound and full of sharp implements, is a trope now. This is the origin story. This is the point where those sorts of images and characters come from. So as you can tell, not only are we impressed with it, but it's had a real effect on popular culture.
Because again, there was never supposed to... Well, at the time when it was like a standalone thing. I mean, even the central character, Pinhead, doesn't have a name in the film. He's just referred to as lead Cenobite. It was the fandom that made Pinhead a cultural icon.
Even in the original book, he didn't have a name. He was just the engineer.
That's it, yes.
That's what they called him in the book. And he was the engineer because he designed new torments for people to experiment with. So as you can see, not only are we impressed, but it's had a great influence on film and popular culture that still resonates today. And when you watch the film, it stands up. It's the height of the 1980s era of special effects excess, perfectly expressed. Like I said, the special effects are much more realistic than many of the horror films of the time. Mm-hmm. Less fantastical in some ways, but more realistic because of it.
More visceral.
Visceral, yeah, absolutely. You really believe a man can be torn to pieces.
Yes.
And the special effects do stand up 100%. Nearly 40 years later.
It's also not so much this one, it was the sequel to this that has given me this this almost pathological fear of dumped mattresses.
Oh!
Whenever I see a mattress in the street, I give it a wide berth.
Yes. I'll take your point.
But also, again, especially for our younger viewers, if you've never seen this, please go and watch it. Don't watch the Netflix one, because the only thing the Netflix one does is give you beige Cenobites.
Netflix? Was that? That wasn't a Netflix.
That was Netflix, wasn't it?
No, it had a theatrical release.
Did it?
Yeah.
I was certain that was a Netflix production.
No.
Was it not?
No. Oh, you're talking about because it's almost PG-13.
Mm.
Yeah, no, that had a theatrical release.
Oh God, did it?
Yeah, that had a theatrical release.
I'd forgotten about that. Oh, right.
Also, it would be on Netflix now if it was a Netflix film.
Oh, okay, I got that wrong. But yeah, don't watch that one because it's terrible. The story's terrible, and the Cenobites are. As I said, everything's just a bit beige, from what I remember.
The Cenobite design is less distinctive in the remake, or reimagining, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It is a reimagining. It's not the same story.
No.
It contains the Cenobites, but essentially it's a completely different story. And the Cenobites have different lore, so... Anyway, that's a tangent. We're talking about the amazing, historical, and wonderful original.
Definitely. I don't know about you, but, I think it's getting... Unless you've got anything else to say. I mean, have you...
Oh, I could go on for hours.
Then please do. Sorry, hang on 1 second. My phone's gone to sleep.
It's one of those films, even without knowing about the behind-the-scenes stuff, I've often noticed that there are elements missing from the story, and I would love to see... I mean, I imagine the footage is long turned to dust in some vault somewhere, or even been thrown away. But I would love to see a director's cut of Hellraiser. There are a number of scenes when it's very, very obvious that stuff has been cut. There are lines that are clearly continuations of an ongoing conversations, but they're the starting gambit in this cut. It's very clear that there's missing elements, missing conversations and context that I really think would enrich this story.
Definitely, because again in the featurette, Barker's saying in there that they had to, or the studio made them cut stuff because they originally were looking at giving it an X rating.
That doesn't surprise me.
So to try and bring it in at least with just an 18, they had to trim bits and pieces here. Again, but some of it, by the sounds of it, again, it's that kind of dichotomy you sometimes have with Hollywood, where it wasn't so much the violence that they wanted cutting out, it was the sex.
Yes.
Because I think that whole scene, again, the lovemaking thing with Frank and Julia, was supposed to have a lot more explicitly pointed out, like buggery and stuff.
Yeah.
And all of that they wanted taken out.
It's always been an element of work of Clive Barker's work of very frank and explicit sexuality, and this is a quintessential example of it. The Hellbound Heart it's all about sex and desire and the things that they drive you to do.
Yes, and those power games, especially with a character like Frank, because it's all about that power.
Your impotent men with their foolish spells cannot protect you from my power.
Yeah, like, for example, in the original text, when Frank first opens the box, as I said, the female Cenobite plays a much bit larger role. She first appears pulling a basic instinct sat on a throne of skulls. And that's how she's introduced to the story. And I can't help but imagine that Clive Barker tried to make that in the film. So, that's just one of many examples from the original text that show really frank and explicit vision. I mean,
Well, again, being about halfway through reading Cold Heart Canyon, yes, that is definitely a thing in his work.
Yeah, yeah.
This is Barker kind of at his best, and I'm so pleased that he did decide to direct it himself. I don't know if we'd have got half as much of a wonderful work if somebody else had been behind the camera.
No, we know what happens when somebody else behind the camera does it.
Yeah.
We get Rawhead Rex. We get Underworld, is what we get.
Underworld?
Absolutely. Yes, I think it was called Mutations in America. I've never actually watched it, but it was. I'm not even sure what it was based on. I don't know if it's an original work or if it's based on one of his stories. But it's a notoriously awful film.
Oh, okay. No. Sorry, when you said Underworld, I thought you meant Underworld.
No, not that Underworld.
No,
not the vampire Underworld. This is the early 80s, 82, 83, something like that.
Because the only ones he directed this, and he directed Lord of Illusions as well, didn't he?
Yes, he directed this, Lord of Illusions and Nightbreed.
I was born to murder the world.
Okay, yeah. We'll look at that one at some
And there was
point.
also a television miniseries, it's quite an extended film called Saint Sinner in the
Never
late 90s. I had to sail the high seas to get a copy of it myself.
Okay. Do check this one out. If you are in any way, shape or form a horror head, then you have no excuse to have not seen this film.
I love the way you phrased that.
So it's getting both of them from me, definitely.
Not only this, I'm going to say, right now, I genuinely wish these were all thumbs.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
A classic, with so much to give, especially if you're a horror fan. I cannot recommend it enough. Totally worth your time, totally worth rewatches. Check out the first couple of sequels, but probably don't venture too far past that. They do get increasingly lower budget.
Definitely. Definitely. I'd say here, check out 2 and 3. Again, 3 is nyeh, but it has some nice moments in it, and weirdly enough, it has Jadzia Dax from Deep Space Nine as the protagonist.
Do forget that, yes. Nothing to complain about there.
No, nothing at all. With Christmas looming ever closer, if you smell something funny up the chimney, it might not be a dead pigeon. Look after yourselves and one another, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, as always, guys, it's TTFA.
Sorry.